hour. So time to get this party started. Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Ben Coffey, the training manager for HydroPoint. And I have with me my friend Russ Jacobsen, a great irrigation designer out of Utah. Say hi, Russ.
Good morning. Happy Wednesday, everybody.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. And let me go ahead. First of all, get a little housekeeping out of the way. The chat box and Q&A box is open. Please send me the chats and the questions. I will try and do my best. I've got my nerd glasses on to try and read that stuff. So if you have questions for Russ or I along the way, please chat them at us. We will do our best to field those. If I don't get to them on the recording, I will follow up after the show. So let me just share my screen here a minute. Oh, that's all Zoom all the time. So today's subject is conventional wire versus two-wire controllers. So I realized very recently that we hadn't done anything on the two-wire conversation, and for water nerds, we have a lot to say about this. So I thought it would be a great place to start. Russ is a irrigation designer by trade. He has all of the letters on his name, the CID, the CLIA. Some of these I don't even recognize. What is the EPA WaterSense label?
It's the EPA WaterSense partner that you sign up for. The EPA then decides that you are worthy of or valued as promoting water conservation.
That's awesome. We got something. We were the first manufacturer to receive the EPA preferred partner status or whatever. That was one of the feathers in the cap of the HydroPoint team. So Russ is going to talk with us about the differences between conventional wire controllers and two-wire controllers. And we're going to highlight some of the key differences, some of the key benefits. I thought this was a great place to start with the two-wire conversation. In future segments, I plan to do two-wire troubleshooting and two-wire installation conversations, but really we want to start at the highest level, which is at that designer level, right? But where a irrigation system lives on paper exclusively. And so Russ is a irrigation designer that I've been working with for more than a decade now and has great projects under his belt using the WeatherTrack. So I thought he would be a great guest to have on. So Russ, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah. What I want to do is, we talked yesterday, I want to just start by laying a foundation of technically what is the foundational technical differences between conventional wire and two-wire, and then we'll jump into kind of the compare and contrast sort of feel, right? We'll talk about the benefits and talk about all the different nuance that
good place to start
it provides. All right, so if we start at the foundation level, the key difference between conventional wire and two-wire controllers is literally how we turn those valves on and off. That is the only difference. So you'll see here the conventional wire controller, and in the Pro 3 world, you can actually look at the board and see that there's a difference. We'll show you the two-wire next, but on a conventional wire system, every valve has its own specific wire, and then one common wire that ties the whole system together is the return path for all of that electricity. So the controller will turn on one station or send electricity down one wire and turn that valve on in the field. That allows us to apply the timer and do all the fancy stuff that WeatherTrack does, and cycle and soak, and really manage very tightly down to a 6-second window exactly how much water we apply on each one of those stations. In contrast, a two-wire controller does something very novel, and this is an innovation in the irrigation industry. This is something that is just a trend that I kind of see started in the East and is moving westward. It's very big in Florida and on the East Coast, and kind of slowly getting adopted here to us out in the West. But what a two-wire controller does is, instead of having a single wire for every station, we have 2 wires that operate the entire controller or the entire field of valves. And we do that by using those wires a little bit differently. So in a conventional wire system, the wires only carry electricity. It's just an on and off, right? But with 2-wire, not only is this 2-wire path carrying the electricity that the valves need, but also it's a communication wire. So instead of having an isolated electrical circuit that turns on and off, the controller actually calls out a number and works with what we call decoders. And so when the controller calls out a number, the decoder hears its number, and the decoder knows, hey, that's my number. Now I need to let the electricity pass through and turn that valve on. So when we talk about the differences between conventional wire and 2-wire, it's most important to know that all of the weather track stuff stays the same. All of the central control, the mobile apps, the reports, all the things that you depend on for weather track water management really are in lockstep. They appear the exact same, and on the app and online, you can't even tell the difference between the 2 controllers. You're really talking about the hardware that it takes out in the field to operate the stations manually or operate the stations from the controller. Is that fair, Russ?
I think that's a good explanation. That's a good summary.
And so when we get into the conversations about why this happens, there's really 3 buckets that I want to explore with you, Russ. There's 3 kind of key ideas that we'll talk about. One, there really is a financial discussion involved. It is a technology that can save significant amounts of money depending on the system that you are installing. In addition, 2-wire has a significant advantage when you're talking about larger systems. The size and scope of some of the systems that Russ designs require 2-wire to cover the physical distance that it takes. And then down the line, one of the things I like to highlight is the flexibility that it provides over your conventional wire controllers that we'll get into. So with that said, I'm going to turn off the PowerPoint and bring up the Russ. Russ, talk to me about the financial benefit of 2-wire over conventional wire.
I think one of the goals is obviously to save money in the cost. If it's the contractor that's doing the job, they want to save money for the owner. So you're looking to save money if you've got 30 or 40 or 50 or 100 or more than that zones on a job, and you've got to run a control wire to each one of those locations, as well as a common that goes to all of them. That can be pretty expensive. And
so what we're really talking about is the cost of copper, the cost of that big fat bundle of 100 station wires and all the copper that you invest in a large system like the one you're talking about, right?
Yeah, having to run one control wire to every single control valve, as well as using that common, the costs run up. And we batted around a little bit yesterday when some of the cost benefit ratios were coming up. I had heard one time in the 30 valve range or 32 valve. I've heard that it's down now. It's more in the 20-24 valve range. I've got a client that if it's 12 valves or less, they run it in conventional wire. If it's more than 12 valves, they run it in 2-wire because it's less expensive for them and it's more cost effective.
Right. So when you're talking about a big system, and I hear about 20 is the most current number that I heard, but I've never put pen to paper on it. So that's just anecdotal.
And me as well.
It really is different for every market and every design, and the distance and all that plays a factor. But what we're saying is the cost of the savings that you can provide on the copper then offsets the extra cost that you have in investing in a 2-wire system and buying the decoder for each valve, because the hardware for the controller actually goes up, but the cost for the entire system is brought down, right?
Correct. And I think that there's the potential for a labor savings of well in not doing as many runs of all of that extra copper that you're installing. That certainly is something to consider.
Are you seeing that from your experience? Are guys charging less because it is less labor to do that?
Yeah, the contractors that are skilled in doing 2-wire are indicating that it's costing them less in labor to run 2-wire than it would be to run 30 wires or 50 wires.
Yeah.
I think another place that you have some savings is that if you can run a greater distance with 2-wire, then you can put in fewer controllers because you don't have to, and less power wire as well. So you don't have to run that extra equipment because the 2-wire runs can be longer because you're not sending that power.
Which is a perfect transition into that second point, right? When you're talking about 2-wire controllers, one of the benefits of using that communication wire is the distance at which we can send those signals, right? I see my great users here, City Colorado Springs comes to mind, City Fort Collins comes to mind, where they're doing streetscapes and they're just running long distances of irrigation. The 2-wire controller can manage stations up to about 2 miles away from where the controller lives. And in addition, it has typically a much higher capacity, right? Where you see a conventional controller typically top out about 48 or 50 stations. The 2-wire controllers have significantly more than that, right?
They sure can.
So, so when you're designing, you're leveraging that in the design to somehow use less hardware. Is that what you said?
Yes.
When
we can, if we can put in fewer controllers, it's a great choice. Or if we can put in less power wire because we've got to run more controllers. One of the, I guess it's off on a little bit of a tangent, but sometimes if you've got a great distance to run to get power to a controller, then you've got to upsize that wire. And if we can save all of that, then 2-wire becomes a savings.
And electricians love them, but they're expensive. So to get those power drops, that's a big investment in the cost of getting those irrigation systems in the ground. If you can,
very much so.
That makes a ton of sense. One of the things that I hope I am not talking out of turn, one of the things that we are working on right now, our current limitation is we have one controller that manages 96 stations. And right now on the development board, the engineers are working on upping that number, creating an OptiFlow controller that can manage 200 stations from one single point, right? We have a 200 station offering right now that is 2 controllers, but this one would be all one controller, could do it potentially on a single 2-wire path, which I don't recommend. But it could. I like to put the controller in the middle and have separate runs going in different directions just for troubleshooting. Because
yes,
talk to me about what you think about that. Is that what you do?
I do. It's HydroPoint WeatherTrack as a manufacturer is looking at offering those and the competitors as well. And it's great to do that. I have a project right now where I've ended up putting in a second 96 station WeatherTrack controller because in that particular area, I'm over 100 zones. What I don't like about that is that then you're tying all of that, if it's only one path, you're tying all of that into one controller, or it may be a great distance. You talked about the 2 miles. Sometimes that's really good in terms of helping to cut down on the cost of the equipment and the wire. But sometimes that creates difficulty for the installer or the maintainer to have to go that far away from the controller if there's need be. Obviously, when there's using the app and that kind of stuff, they can do that, but it's still having, I like to do one point of connection, one controller, one master valve, one flow meter, and usually that's under 100 valves and under, and that's where I'd like to stay as a designer.
Makes sense, 100%. In terms of simplicity of management, I totally agree. But really what I see out there is more than one, a confusing hodgepodge in some cases of hardware. And so can you speak to how you keep all of that straight out in the field as a designer? What kind of design elements you bring in to try and help the guys in the field in the future understand what they're looking at?
Well, the first one that comes to mind, and I'm trying to think of racking my brain of other ones, but one of them is on the site that I'm mentioning is I'll have multiple controllers. I want to do a separate color of wire for each controller. And that goes with, WeatherTrack's allied company and using Page Wire, they can do a different jacket color on the wire. So the A controller gets blue, the B controller gets green, the C controller gets yellow.
That's awesome.
Something like that. That's one way to do that.
You just see that valve wire, you see that 2-wire path and the jacket color, and you automatically know what controller that ties back to, what system that's a part of.
Yeah, if you're troubleshooting those things, then then that's something that can be done. Another thing that I like to do is in troubleshooting and in service is I like, again, it's an allied product for you guys, but I like using the Page Decoder Fuse device so that if there's problems, you have the ability to troubleshoot it or isolate sections or areas.
I've seen that. I saw that at the IA show. I thought that was genius, where you could just go in and it's literally a fuse in the valve box where you can just select which path you turn on or off to make troubleshooting more seamless.
And it can get even more. You can drill it down even more if it's even a smaller controller or a smaller system. If you've got legs or spurs going off in different directions, you can say everything on the north side of the project uses the blue wire, everything on the south side of the project uses the green, on the west side it uses another color, and on the north side it uses a fourth color. It doesn't cost the contractor anything more in terms of cost of the product, but the end user, it makes it easier for them to know which leg that they're working on.
And as the guy who's been out in the field opening valve boxes trying to figure out what the installer did, I got to tell you, that would have been a blessing that would have saved me about 100 hours on one of the sites that I was working on. So
those are good choices.
Love that. Another design element that I want to highlight and get your opinion on, one of the things that I think is awesome that WeatherTrack does is offer the option when you're talking about your point of connection devices, when you're talking about your master valves and your flow sensors. We offer the option to either direct wire those back to the controller or create a connection with their own specific 2 wires like they do on a conventional controller, or to add those devices onto the 2-wire path. And add a decoder in there and just have all of that information and functionality live on the 2-wire path. Do you have a preference? Do you have an opinion?
I've had an evolution of that. I started off in when doing 2-wire, where I put the master valve and the flow sensor on the same 2-wire path as all of the other decoders for the control valves. And then the evolution from there, the next one was to run a separate dedicated 2-wire path to the master valve and flow sensor. So you had 2-wire paths coming back to the controller, one that was for the control valves and one that was for the master valve and the flow sensor. And then the evolution for me now is the one that you just alluded to, where it's running conventional wire to the master valve and then running the shielded wire like PE39 to the flow sensor. And that way they're dedicated and they're on their own. And that's an evolution for me that's come from help and training from the local guys here in Utah, Joe Jackson and Brady Pitcher. And shout out to Joe. He just sent me a text that said, hi. So Joe must be online.
Boys. I'm drinking from the sprinkler supply chalice in honor of your... one of the things that I think is great about that is I feel like it increases the safety of the protections that we build in. Because what I've seen in the past is if you run your master valve and flow devices on that 2-wire path and somebody comes through with a trencher, cuts your master valve, your 2-wire path and your main line at the same time, that event can not only rupture and start spilling out water all over the place, but then create enough interference on the 2-wire path that the communication can't happen, right?
Yep.
So the controller either doesn't see or can't shut that master valve down right when you need it most. And so we as a company, and me as a water nerd, prefer that direct connection, just because we feel like it's the safest way to go. All right, so we've done the cost benefit, we've done the design benefit. Let's talk a little bit about the expansion benefit, the flexibility that 2-wire provides. Can you speak to that a little bit?
There's two that pop into my head. The first one is if it's a project or an owner that that one and done is not good for them. They're always changing. They're always altering. They're always upgrading. They're always revising their landscape. In a 2-wire scenario, if they decide to go in and take out some of the turf and split that area in half and add a zone, in a 2-wire scenario, that's really easily done. In a conventional wire, it's not.
Relates in our portfolio, we have those kinds of customers, right? We have the high Fortune 500 corporate campuses that are always adding a garden here or changing the landscape there.
Or they're adapting. Yeah, they're adapting to whatever is happening in their world. Maybe all of a sudden urban gardening becomes a big thing and they want to put in vegetables, around the back of the building or something. They can do that. That's a huge one. And
can you
I have
explain
clients
how
that
2-wire makes that easier real quick?
What was that?
Say how 2-wire makes that easier?
2-wire makes that easier because the path is already there and you're not having to run additional conventional wire. You're just adding a new decoder into the path that's there. And that's a real easy thing to do. And I have clients that fit that bill that I was talking about, where they make a lot of changes as time goes on. That's something that works really well. Another thing for me that 2-wire becomes a real great thing for flexibility is in terms of expansion or in phasing. I've got a project right now where we're putting it in phases. It's 120 acres of landscape. There's only one phase going in. If we do 2-wire paths, then we can add on to that in the near future and just move. But if we do that in conventional wiring, maybe we need to add a new controller. Maybe we need to go back and take wire through existing landscape back to the controller and then upsize the controller. Those two things can be cost prohibitive. And
so just like in the first conversation, right, where we were talking about expanding a changing landscape, what you're saying is to add a valve on a conventional wire system, you have to home run a wire all the way back to the controller. And you
have to assume that the controller is big enough for it.
Oh yeah, that too. Especially in this second conversation where you're talking about expansion, right? You might be adding not one valve, but 12 or 20 or more valves, right? And instead of having to start at that new phase, you can just pick up that 2-wire path and keep going. You don't even have to trench back to the controller. So a significant time savings through just the flexibility of what that 2-wire technology provides.
Yeah, those are two big ones.
I like that. That's awesome. Well, Russ, that is great. We are just right on time. Before we move off topic, I know that we talked about a lot of things yesterday. And I wanted before I close the book on the conventional wire versus 2-wire conversation, any closing thoughts on that?
No, I think it's a great choice. One of the thoughts, and I don't know if this is where it'd be a good time to bring up one of my thoughts, Ben, was as contractors, if there are contractors out there, using 2-wire gives you the ability to set yourself apart because it's not as common or as frequently used. It requires a little bit more skill, a little bit more knowledge. But if you do that, maybe you set yourself apart or set yourself above, and that maybe can reduce some of your competition.
Absolutely. And a good 2-wire contractor is a blessing. I can speak to that, because it is fundamentally different. It is learning a new process, right? And so if an irrigation tech who doesn't really know or hasn't been trained in 2-wire tries to go and do conventional wire troubleshooting on a 2-wire system, it can add hours and hours of headaches and troubleshooting and cost the customer a significant amount of money in just inefficient troubleshooting, right? If you're paying your contractor by the hour to find why your valves aren't running, and they aren't familiar with the technical processes involved with troubleshooting two-wire, it can cost them and you a lot of time and money. So I do agree. I think that differentiating yourself as a contractor is always a good thing. And please, if you are touting yourself as a quality two-wire contractor, know what you're doing, because
actually be there.
The difference is night and day, right? When a two-wire system is installed properly and all the connections are good and everything is sound, it works, and it works long-term without very much maintenance. But the opposite is true too. Like if you have a bad installation and bad splices, or it can cost you just repeated trips back to that site and constant troubleshooting, and why did I make this investment in the first place? So
well said.
Reliable technology that depends on good installation and good maintenance. All right, so with that said, Russ, I have questions. Let's throw out the questions. Bill says, what does Page manufacture wire specific to HydroPoint equipment, or can we use the cable that we might use for any other irrigation brand? Mind if I bat that one down for you?
Absolutely.
Okay, so WeatherTrack does not create our own wire. We don't have a WeatherTrack specific wire. We're designed to be a retrofit technology. So where you have two-wire systems, the wire in the ground is good enough. And Page does a great job at letting you mix and match exactly what you want out of that wire, specifically jacket colors and wire colors inside. Where Russ likes to have it, the jacket a certain color to identify what controller it's tied to, I like to have the black and red wires inside, because the wires on our decoders and all of our decoder devices are black and red and they're polarized. So to keep everything clear, I like that little addition. So Page does a great job at just customizing whatever wire you want. But if you have maxi wire, if you have a huge spool of whatever two-wire you used previously, it's all copper to us. It doesn't make much difference.
Yeah, as long as it meets the minimum requirements that WeatherTrack has for use with their two-wire equipment, then you're fine. And one of the things that Ben didn't mention, but that kind of goes without saying, is that it, in addition to coming in multiple colors of jackets, it also comes in multiple gauges. You can get the two-wire equipment, or the two-wire wire that works with the Page, that works with the WeatherTrack equipment, in both a 12 gauge and a 14 gauge. So the 12 gauge obviously is giving you less resistance with the ability to run further. And the 14 gauge is a standard one that's used frequently in my systems. I want just a little bit more robustness, and I'd rather have the owner spend more money, even if they don't need it. I would rather have the 12 gauge run just so we have less resistance, so that it helps the system operate better. The cost difference to me is negligible.
All right, that's awesome. So Bill, you had another question where you asked if I will address proper splicing, and that is a conversation for another day. We're going to hold that off for when we bring a contractor in here and talk about the field nerd stuff. So we'll definitely drill in, because that is a super important part of the conversation. You are right on point. And then Tony Monzone asked about our preferred connection between the flow sensor and master valves and the controller. We talked about the direct connect option being my preference, and I gathered yours. I don't want to speak for you, but I think that that's yours as well, right? So thank you for those questions. We'll wrap up. Russ, I have a traditional way that I like to wrap up, and that is to ask all of my guests a standardized question. First-time guests get the "What does WeatherTrack save you?"
Well, and I hope that you'll be tolerant in me altering that just a little bit. And it's what does WeatherTrack provide me?
Okay.
And from my perspective, WeatherTrack has provided me with comfort, with confidence, and with peace of mind as a specifier, as a designer. I want the confidence that once the system is in, that we have no problems. I want the confidence that it's the right product for the right project that I'm doing, and I want the confidence and comfort that WeatherTrack is a manufacturer, that the local provider, the supplier, that they're going to stand behind that. That all of those things will make it so that the contractor, you know, I'm beyond spoiled here locally in Utah. Sprinkler supply, I think, you know, at the risk of alienating your other suppliers, is the cat's meow, and they are fantastic. And yet I've done other work outside of Utah across the country where the supplier there has been fantastic, and you know, and your local people that are in that area are fantastic. And so what WeatherTrack has provided me is an extra level of comfort, an extra level of confidence and peace of mind that it takes care of any and every issue that I have on a project, and getting it done from design to maintenance and management long term.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you for that insight. With that, I think it is time to wrap this one up, our final effort of 2020. We will not be back for next week, but episodes of Smart Water Wednesday will resume in 2021. And so if you are one of our loyal weekly listeners, thank you for tuning in. We are ecstatic to have you and excited to be a part of your water management conversation, and look forward to providing similar content and good water nerd stories from the front line in 2021. So thank you all. And Russ, you want to take us out?
Thank you for having me, and best wishes everybody for a prosperous coming year. Be safe, be healthy.
Sounds great. Thanks, Russ.
Thank you.